it took a long time for me to understand what the point of alchemy was. I was so connected to alchemy because of the art and the alchemical plates. Very much like the art of the tarot, the alchemical plates are so engaging and they're so enigmatic. And they talk to you in these beautiful symbols, these clusters of symbols. So you can see all the symbols and you understand what all the symbols are. I know what a dog is. I know what a cat looks like. I know what two children holding cups is. But what does it mean? It's so accessible and it's so enigmatic at the same time. And the real value in alchemy lies in the subtlety and the operating system, if you will call it that, that I've come to understand alchemy as a sort of operating system, or as a sort of cosmology, or as Jordan Peterson calls it. Jordan Peterson wrote a whole book called The Map of Meaning. And there's another amazing person, Clotaire Rapaille, who did a book called The Culture Code, that also talks about this idea that there are systems of organization for the brain, or ways to organize your brain, that are much more efficient structures that lend to a higher and better and wider ranging state of consciousness that not only involves thought forms and the way that you understand the world, but then there is another component that we'll get to as well that has to do with your body as an alembic and the chemical processes in your brain. So when Aaron talks about this triangle, we have the salt, sulfur, mercury triangle, and those things are deeply charged with significance themselves. This primordial triangle also represents body, soul, and spirit. In different parts of the show, we've talked about different polar opposites that combine to create a third term, which is a very alchemical thing. So all the way back to Egypt, we have Isis and Osiris combining to create Horus. And in episode 3, I believe Gary Osborne and Richard Casaro, and basically everyone except Aaron, talked about this fantastically cool phenomena of the hypnagogic state. And we even find this triangle in consciousness, in the two polarities of consciousness, waking and sleeping. In the moment of union between the two polarities of waking and sleeping consciousness, we have this third term that would be the cinnabar, or the mercury in alchemy, that is that aspect of consciousness known as the hypnagogic state. And when we get around to doing director's cuts of the episodes, Aaron was in New Zealand at the time we shot that episode, and he has fantastically insightful things to say about it. So at a certain point in the recut of that episode, which I believe is episode 3, we'll hear a lot more from Aaron. But in the meantime, could you share a couple of those fantastic insights you had about the hypnagogic state as a third term in our psyche?
Right. You might have to jog my memory about what track I was on. It was a few months ago. Yeah, do you remember?
There's a very physical, obvious, palpable world that the body resides in. Our physical meat body resides in this certain world. And then there's a world that's sort of completely of ideas and archetypes and so on. And then there seems to be this mid-term between this disembodied or kind of mental world and the world that we can access through individual consciousness. And this hypnagogic state seems to be this state under which we can do some of the extended functions of consciousness, like astral travel. And it suggests maybe the idea that Terence McKenna always forwarded, that there are places that are non-physical places, but still places we can visit with the psyche. And it doesn't mean that they're not real, but they're just not physical.
That's right. Yeah, that's what Henry Corbin, who was a colleague of Jung's, Henry Corbin called that the mundus imaginalis, the imaginal world, and he distinguished imaginal from imaginary. And it was the realm of what he called phantasm or fantasy, which in its Greek word, it's a Greek word, and in its Greek roots, it has the meaning of sort of the realm of appearances, that which appears, and so there's this realm. So it's the realm in which it was seen to mediate between our physical, sensible reality, the reality of our five senses, and the ultimate metaphysical reality, which we can't perceive directly. So in between these two worlds or levels of reality, there's this kind of mediating realm, which kind of partakes of both, but is also neither. So it's kind of neither and both. So it's not physical, and it's not purely metaphysical. It's not sensory in a concrete way, but it sort of it clothes itself in the senses. It clothes itself in visual and auditory and kinesthetic forms to express invisible principles.
And they seem to be forms that whoever the person interacting with this space, it seems weirdly suited. It speaks to you in forms and in things that you know. Is that your experience?
Yeah. It always clothes itself in, because the imagination is also our dream realm. It's the realm in which, and the funny thing about the dream realm is that when we're in that world, it is absolutely real for us. But when we wake up, that world is regarded as almost just a fantasy or just a figment of our unconscious processing, and we kind of dismiss it. But you could say the same about this side of reality, that when we're engaged in this waking consciousness, we think it is absolutely real. But who's to say on the flip side that we could dismiss it in the same way we dismiss the dream world, So, but the idea is that those states of being or those realms have their own ontological reality. And that was Corban's point with the mundus imaginalis. It wasn't really just this phantasm. It had its own ontological status. It had its own real existence, and therefore we could, even though. And the thing is that it would take parts of our, because in the ancient Greek theories that were informing this idea, they used to believe the sensory world made an impression on the imagination, and so would retain kind of an imaginal form or version of the sensory world, and so these would seep into our consciousness or our unconscious and become kind of the palette with which the imaginal world would paint that reality for us to experience.
As artists, every artist and every creative and really every business person, any person who's ever had a problem to solve or some epiphany that was just out of their reach, their artists in particular are very familiar with this state of consciousness, or this realm or sphere or frequency of consciousness that it's quite separate and distinct from ordinary, regular waking consciousness. And it occurs in odd times. Since the 50s and the introduction of psychedelics into the Western world, modern day psychonauts and interastronauts, I like that word, interastronauts, people who've experienced the psychedelic experience, all uniformly report that they have visited this reality, and it wasn't this physical reality, although frequently you can have these experiences and you're in this fantastic world and you open your eyes and it's not like you've gone to another place, but it was like there's another space coexistent with our reality that we seem to visit that is very much like just another channel on the TV. The TV's always in the same place, but you're participating in different channels. Totally.
My experience of that has always been that there is an other world, but it is in this world. So I know some people have the distinct experience of traveling to a distinctly other world, and it seems totally removed from this one. But whenever I've ever encountered that realm, it's always been by this world, this concrete sensory world, opening up and revealing itself as alive and animated and sentient. It starts communicating with you through everything that you can see, so it's very much, and that's what Plato and other ancient philosophers would talk of the anima mundi, the soul of the world. So and that again was a mediating force between realms, just as our own
when
soul.
People are on a hallucinogenic experience, and they often report connecting with this much greater kind of universal intelligence, or this state of just universal love or universal intellect. It always seemed very interesting to me because it's hard to separate, is this a space, is it an area, or is it consciousness itself? Whatever it is seems to be intelligent. So when people talk about ibogaine or psilocybin mushrooms or something, there's this really bizarre experience that the thing that you're participating with is not you, it's other than you, but it knows you extremely well. And almost like that is the undifferentiated consciousness that we separate from to become, physical entities. And so we know it because it is us, and it was us, and it will be us again, but we are temporarily separated from it in incarnation. And so people, like very much the Western model of praying, where you get on the phone and you tell God what you want, and it's I'm going to tell God, he's going to sit there and listen to me. One of the reasons why the Eastern cultures dovetailed so well with the psychedelic culture and the new counterculture is this very Eastern idea that you interact with something without projecting onto it, without telling it what's up, or without bugging it, like you bug God. I want a new car, I want whatever, I want world peace, whatever, however noble. Instead of projecting yourself into it, if you stop and are quiet, it will become proactive. And Jung called this active imagination, where if you're not projecting onto your inner screen, your third eye or your mind's eye, you'll find that your mind's eye starts talking to you. And so Gary Lockman, certainly for me, Terence McKenna was my door to a lot of this stuff. But Terence McKenna actually had protocols for interacting with disincarnate entities that you come across during your moments of Radiohead, like on a mushroom trip or something like that. So everybody, including Swedenborg and all of these amazing people through history, Suardi, they talk about this place not only as a place that you can visit, but a place that's populated with disincarnate intelligences of different types. Even Rupert Sheldrake, when you catch Rupert at the right time, Rupert's a devotee that the sun itself is conscious, and that there are these layers and hierarchies of consciousness that don't necessarily take bodies in the sense that we're familiar with them, but in this hypnagogic state, and in the in the psychedelic state. And in my opinion, they might very well be one and the same. It's just this new door that Western people have learned to access the hypnagogic state without having to put a lot of work into it. But the thing that always impressed me about this was that you literally encounter entities and situations that are not from you, but that you can interact with.
Right. Yeah. No. It's definitely definitely the world is animated, and entities, sentient beings come through in various ways to communicate with you. But one thing I found, at least in my experiences with psychedelics, is that the divine encounters I had were kind of deeply ingrained in my own being. Like it was more about unfolding and revealing my own divine nature, as much as encountering other divine beings. And that's interesting, because in Haitian voodoo and traditions like that, they talk about being possessed by certain spirits, and they talk about being ridden by the Loire, for instance, where these spirits would possess people in this ecstatic state and so quote unquote ride them.
Wow! Drive them around? Wow.
Well, like they become a vehicle for that spirit. So the person loses their consciousness, and this other spirit takes over for a certain period of time in this ritualistic, ecstatic state. But they also speak of what they call a two-headed possession, where you're still conscious of your own being, but there's also something else, working through you. And I guess my experience was more of that second kind, and I had an experience of the Nordic divinity Loki acting through me, but on a deeper level, it was essentially the way it came about was that when I liberate my own nature, when I free myself from all my kind of socio-cultural inhibitions and limitations and all the things that hold me back from being what I, essentially am on some level. What was released was this, wild, playful Lokian spirit, which
trickster.
Was like, very much the trickster archetype, and which is, it was like, it's one of those things that made perfect sense, but it was also, totally, I would have never seen it coming. Entities can unfold through you and as you, not as well as in a subject-object kind of connection between two beings.
I don't even remember the person that was originally born into this body. I've had so many people driving me around.